Welcome and good morning, everyone. Sorry for the brief technical delay, but thank you so much for attending our panel titled Applied Design Research Across Communication Contexts, Media Organizations, and Public Engagement. This is the first time that the Department of Communication Studies and School of Journalism participate in Design Research Week, so we're excited to be part of the group. We are going to be, talking about how design comes into the practical and applied work of communication. There is a field called communication design, and a lot of the work that is happening here would actually fall under that. So today we have talks about design in journalism and communicating news to audiences, about campaigns for social change, about immersive media, about designing interventions. So hopefully you'll enjoy. So the way we're going to do it is we'll have the speakers come to the podium for their presentation, and then at the end they'll come up for questions. So please write down your questions and we'll ask them. I want to introduce the speakers, and I'm going to do it in alphabetical order. So first, Chen is an MS student in the Media Innovation and Data Communication. She focuses on how storytelling, strategy, and evidence-based communication can support organizations, public health, and social impact. She has professional experience in journalism, public relations, and strategic communication, and academic background in sociology. Filiz Durgun is a PhD student in interdisciplinary design and media at Northeastern University. She earned her bachelor's degree in graphic design and a master's in game design here at Northeastern, and she studies how visual and interactive design strategies can promote mental health awareness, reduce stigma, and foster understanding across diverse cultural contexts. Meg Heckman is an award-winning writer, educator, and scholar who pursues two distinct research streams: feminist media history and contemporary local news sustainability. Her historical work centers on uncovering the overlooked contributions of women in journalism, and she's also involved in several projects that explore how AI and other computational methods can help surface more inclusive historic narratives. Tamés is an award-winning documentary media maker and media technologist. He teaches video production and XR design courses and is the author of the book Mediating Presence: Immersive Experience Design for UX Designers, Filmmakers, Artists, and Content Creators, co-authored with Peter Zakruski.
Peter Zak for short.
Peter Zak. And Zedek teaches all aspects of media innovation, including data visualization, design, project management, and collaboration, and visual editing. And he heads a design studio specializing in content-driven design and strategy. As the creative director of the Boston Globe and bostonglobe.com, he led the print and digital design development, data visualization, and infographics teams, building an award-winning visual brand. So we have a great set of speakers, and we are going to get started, and our first speaker will be Dan. So let's, I'm going to share the screen. And yeah.
My only job here is to press the forward arrow and not spill my tea on the laptop.
Or we could, maybe I need a new one.
So this talk is called Design for Impact, the Media Innovation Studio. And I have design, impact, innovation, basically every buzzword that you need. If I had storytelling up there, your buzzword bingo card would be completely full. But the design, the Media Innovation Studio is a master's program in the School of Journalism. And despite its sort of newfangled name, it really deals with a lot of the verities and some of the core principles and core values of journalism, which is giving voice to people who don't necessarily have a voice, letting them tell their own stories, holding power, trying to hold power accountable, telling truth to power, all those sorts of things. Here's a slide from 50 years ago. If you were saying I'm a journalist, maybe even 10 or 15 years ago, it would have meant something very specific. Somebody walking around, maybe with like a fedora and definitely with a notepad and a pencil. But that's really changed considerably since then. To be a journalist now is definitely to be a reporter and a researcher and to go out and do interviews and talk with people. But equally, it means to be a photojournalist, to be a videographer. And being a videographer doesn't necessarily mean creating a documentary film or doing something for the website. It could equally mean doing a vertical video for TikTok, doing journalism that way. It means doing data visualization, maps and charts and interactives that reveal what's hidden, in the words of Alberto Cairo. And finally, it means being a designer and a developer and all the things that go with that, particularly dealing with audience. So in other words, not just thinking about the stories we're telling, but who we're telling them to and how they might use those stories. We work in teams to tell the stories that we work on, and each team includes somebody with those subdisciplines or interest in those subdisciplines. So some reporters, some videographers, some designers, some people interested in development. And we call those teams multifunctional teams. And this is a real difference in the way journalism is made from the way it used to be made. It used to sort of follow the railroad train model, where the reporters were the engine, and then when they were done, they handed it off to a photographer maybe, and then they handed it off to a map maker perhaps after that. And finally, in the caboose, the designers who cleaned up whatever was left over. Instead, we're all working collaboratively right from the start across all these subdisciplines. We learn from the world, and a big part of this talk is about the ways that we take our work outside of Shillman Hall and Holmes Hall out into the world, and maybe more importantly, the things we get back from the world and how it changes our storytelling and hopefully even changes us. So one of the ways we learn from the world is learning from app development. If you've ever worked on a project, it seems impossibly big when you start out. And we're using something called the Agile Development System. I don't know, are any of you familiar with that? Some of you are, which comes from the software world. And the idea is, rather than having a big project, which starts at the beginning with a lot of hopes and dreams and ends with a crushing deadline at the end, you break it up into subsections, which are called sprints, each of which is devoted to a different part of the project. And that's divided again into parts. So each week, the teams report, what did we do last week? What are we working on this week? And what are some blockers? And this is a collaborative process. The things that are blocking one team might be impediments to others, or perhaps things they found ways to get around. And then at the end of each sprint, we sort of change things up a little bit. And rather than talking about the content that we're working on, we talk about our process. What worked working on a team? What was a challenge? And there are many challenges working on teams. It's really a tough process, but a vital one, an essential one that we do out in the world. And what do we want to try in the next sprint? How could we change our process perhaps to make it more effective? We also learn from the world of journalism because we are collaborating, as I'll talk about more in a minute, with national and local publications on the work that we do. What do we learn from them? Well, we report a multi-part series typically, and we learn about real-world expectations, working with an editor who sits with us, and you get the kind of feedback you get from an editor in real life. And last but certainly not least, real-world deadlines, which are much less forgiving than school deadlines can be sometimes. Part of our work is developing a social media campaign for the project we're working on. And from that, we learn about audience research, we do audience testing, we develop product plans, all those kinds of things which are about how users engage with what we're creating. And finally, we do all the design and production. We do prototyping, we do the coding from scratch, we do testing, we do revising, we do more revising, as typically one does. So we're building partnerships all the time. We've worked with WBUR, on a project about development. We're working on a project with Commonwealth Beacon right now. I'll talk about in a minute. We work with the Boston Globe, and we've worked with the Emancipator, Ibrahim Kendi's publication. Here's the good stuff. Here's some of the things that we've done. We heard about an innovative program that was bringing restorative justice to the legal system. This was bringing together the victims of crimes along with the perpetrators and looking at alternatives to prison, breaking the prison pipeline. It was really powerful work and really, really emotional work as well, because the heart of it was something called the Circle, which brought together the victims of crimes with people who had committed similar crimes, talking about what it felt like to be on both sides of the circle. And I don't think I've ever had a project where more students showed up in my office in tears saying, what I heard today was so powerful. This is why I became a journalist. One woman telling us about her murdered son, sitting across from somebody who was a murderer and hearing about them. Sitting in prison in a circle of 20 people and asking, how many of you were physically abused as a child? 20 raised their hand. Asking how many of you were sexually abused as a child. All 19 people in prison raised their hand. So really seeing how the cycle of crime and trauma repeats from year after year. I was going to show you a little video here, but let's see. Oh. I'm sure this is going to work here. We also did a project looking at affirmative action, the end of affirmative action specifically. The year that the Supreme Court overruled the use of affirmative action in higher education, we reported on the first class of high school graduates who were graduating without affirmative action. We talked to schools admissions counselors around the country. And we talked to economists and sociologists about what the impact might be going forward. This project was nominated for Best Education Story of the Year. We lost out, I believe, to the Washington Post, but there's no shame in graduate students losing out to the Washington Post. Let's see if I can okay. I'm working these bugs out for the rest of you, just so you know. There it is. Thank you so much. Okay, thank you. And so I'll just show you a very small piece of that. This is one where we actually created sort of an avatar of somebody who's going through the admissions process based on real stories that were reported, and talked about how things had changed to them, you know, all the things that they faced from their background and going forward as well. It was a really powerful project that got more than 500,000 hits for the Emancipator, which was pretty amazing. All right, we switch back here. I got it. Thank you. We're getting there. It's gonna happen. And finally, this year we're working on a project in collaboration with Commonwealth Beacon, which does a lot of reporting on public policy. It's been about a year. It will be a year exactly in April since the Trump administration canceled all the EPA grants for environmental justice projects around the country, including more than a dozen worth millions of dollars in Massachusetts. So our reporters are going all around the state and reporting on the impact of those cuts on communities. We're out in Springfield, which was called the asthma capital of the world because it has the highest incidence of asthma from around the country, which was caused by pollution. A really innovative program to correct that, lost all of its funding. So we're out in Springfield reporting on that. We're in the town of Chelsea, where projects that were used that were supposed to help with what are called heat islands, places that are hotter than the surrounding areas because of lack of tree cover. Funding for that was gone. The Chelsea story is also a really great story because it's a story of resilience. The community organizations there are also finding ways around the losses of funding, calling together community support to help build on that. We're out in Fitchburg, looking at some projects that were supposed to help with water pollution issues there and flooding issues out there. We just recently toured the floodplain, came back with some amazing stories and photos as well. And finally, outside of the EPA shadow, we found this database that reports the emissions from every single building in Boston. And and we looked at how those emissions are distributed. We found that the institutions that are supposed to protect our health, like hospitals, are actually the worst polluting buildings in Boston. Second place, schools. So the two institutions that we think of as protecting our health and our future are in fact some of the most highly polluting ones. That's a quick look at the work that we do. Thanks for the time, and thanks for the tech support also.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Meg Heckman. And I can't find my mouse. I did.
You recognize your work?
Yes, it's the other one.
I thought knowing
Terrific. Hi, everyone. My name is Meg Heckman. I'm an associate professor in the School of Journalism, and I am thrilled to be here today, in part because one of the things I've learned in the 8 years that I've been at Northeastern and part of CAMD is that design really does percolate through all aspects of our lives. And so when I was invited to present on this panel, I kind of had a moment and had to give myself a little pep talk. So I'm glad to be here. And what I'm going to be talking about today is related to some ongoing work I've been doing in the Boston Globe collection, in special collections over at the library, specifically related to the 1.65 million photographs that were donated to the university. This is one of them up here. It's the Boston skyline, and that is the back of the photo with photographer annotations. And I've included that because those annotations are very important to what I'm going to be talking about today. So I'll be talking about two evolving processes and how they have been designed and redesigned over the years. The first is related to how Boston Globe visual journalists have adapted to technological change to redesign their workflows and their processes in ways that have rippled across not just the Globe newsroom, but across news work in general. And then I'm also going to touch briefly on how I'm rethinking my own processes as a media historian, specifically as they relate to potential applications of Claude for processing and analyzing oral histories. So why did this not? Okay, there we go. There we go. So just a quick bit of background. If you're not familiar with the Boston Globe Library collection, the Globe moved to smaller offices just under 10 years ago, and it donated its morgue to Northeastern. Morgue is the word that newspaper people use to describe their internal libraries. The term comes from, it's where the dead papers go, the previous day's papers go. This collection is massive. It includes far more than just photos, but I'm going to be talking today about the visual collections. 1.65 million photographs and an estimated 5.7 million negatives. I was brought on to an interdisciplinary team of researchers under an NEH grant to test applications of computer vision for indexing and surfacing trends and themes in the visual parts of the collection. That process has been a journey because about a year ago, our funding got pulled by the NEH without explanation or advance notice. It was awful. Like I lost my research assistants. Other members of the team got moved to different corners of the university. But I became determined to finish the oral histories I had started under the grant, which I'll tell you about in a moment. And so CAMD and the new lab let me repurpose some professional development money and some other funds to finish this. So I'm incredibly grateful for that. Lots of past collaborators, and a more recent collaborator is Claude Opus 4.6, which I'll talk about in a moment, with mixed feelings. So oral histories were not part of the initial scope of the grant, but we realized we were going to need to collect them to allow us to better understand how these images came to be and how decisions were made about editorial decisions, about workflow, about categorizing. So essentially, we needed to bring in retroactive humans in the loop to help the technologies that we were trying to develop more accurately analyze not just the front of the images, but also the back of the images. And then I also had real journalistic questions and historian questions about who were the people. You know, we were spending all of this time looking at handwriting on the back of images. Who were they? What was their creative process? What were their professional experiences? How did they change over time? So I worked with some research assistants and we tracked down 6 Boston Globe visual journalists. And we got a pretty good cross-section of the 20th and early 21st centuries. And this is a quick snapshot. We have 6 voices that span 5 decades. 4 of the folks I interviewed are photographers. One, Dan Zedek, is my amazing colleague. So this is very meta today. And then Michelle McDonald is an adjunct instructor who teaches a photojournalism class for us. And I just want to, Yuli Welsh, she was the first known woman to work as a photojournalist in the city of Boston. This woman has stories. Young-hee Kim, one of the very first women of color to work as a photojournalist in Boston, and she survived a hostage situation while working as a foreign correspondent, and we talked about that a lot. It was my honor to speak to these people, and I am incredibly grateful for their time and memories. The main theme that surfaced relevant to today's discussion is this idea of technology as a cascading disruption in newsroom workflows. So newsrooms, particularly analog newsrooms during the 20th century, were built on a 24-hour cycle around a printing press. It was an incredibly regimented, interconnected process. And whenever a technological disruption appeared on the scene, it would cause cascading effects. And there were a lot of examples of this. The one I'm going to point to today is the change in metadata. So again, we're going back to the backside of those photos. Here on the left, we have a photo Welsh took in mid-1970s. Oh, sorry, just kidding. And you can see she hand wrote the metadata. And both of these photos were categorized as Boston demonstrations. And you can see she forgot that little red, the dem, she forgot to write down that it wasn't just Boston, it was Boston demonstrations. And then over here, by the time Kim was photographing demonstrations about a decade later, we can see there's typewritten information and also handwritten. So we can start to see that intersection of analog and digital And then when I talked to Dan, we were talking about a computer system called Merlin, where you go, and I used that when I was working in newsrooms, where you would go in and enter digital metadata on digital images. So the same concept, but applied differently. Another example that gets into editorial decision making is just the evolution of camera technology. So Don Preston, who started in 1969, he was this young guy, had to kind of earn trust in the newsroom and among the other photographers. And he had what was a cutting edge camera at that moment in time. And it allowed him to take more pictures in the field and give the editors more choices. So he took more creative risks and started to shift what was considered a standard newspaper photo at that time. And I'll skip pagination. So my own process related to oral histories changed quite a bit in relation to this project, in part out of necessity. I was having a hard time finding time to clean up the transcripts on my own, get them back to the interview subjects. And so I started testing Northeastern's version of Claude for oral history preparation and analysis. It was great for the actual transcript production. The librarians are pretty happy with it. And I will definitely use it for that type of clerical work again. Then I tried to run thematic analysis on it, and that we had a little more mixed results. It overcoded. It was pretty good at pulling evidence. However, it had real interpretive limits. It completely missed the emotional component of change. Like Kim described her hostage experience, and Claude described that as production logistical challenges, not the fact that she had been held hostage and was like the only woman in the space. It was a whole thing. And then the other thing that I am sitting with is how using Claude made me feel more detached from the data, from the people, despite producing these beautiful transcripts. So that is my own changing process. Happy to talk more about it. And then what's next? A bunch of other themes emerged, particularly around gender and racial barriers. This sample included 4 pioneering Boston women journalists, and I will be doing more with them and their lives, and you can look out for it later this year under my new lab. All right, that's it. Thank you very much. This was terrific. Thank you for inviting me.
That is called the closing. Tripwire in this case. Did you see that show the other day? It's to hear about. That one. This one. Yep. No. This one. All right. Sent. Working? I am here. Ready to go? Okay. I'm going to be talking about mediating presence, which is the theme of the book that I recently co-authored with Peter Zach. I press the down arrow and nothing happens. I press the right arrow and nothing happens. Oh, I click. There we go. Modality issues. The book is rooted in this idea that we are in a state of major transition from the realm of human-computer interaction to the realm of human-computer immersion. And these are very different contexts. And these times really require that artists, designers, and media makers play a major role in shaping this medium, because the medium has to be co-created. It cannot be invented. It cannot be left to the tech bros. Presence, which drives the theoretical foundation of the books, is a central feature of what it feels like to abide in pure awareness. But we must be careful, because presence may actually mean slightly different things to different people. One reading of presence is being fully in the present moment. And that comes from Thomas Metzinger, who is an amazing author, and you should read all of his books. Now, mediating presence is a special case of experiencing pure awareness. Although there are many definitions of presence, the basic concept is the illusion of non-mediation. And this comes from a recent survey article covering the last 25 years of virtual reality research. So as we move from the realm of human-computer interaction to human-computer immersion, Peter and I have defined immersive experience design, which we call XRXD, because everyone has to introduce a new acronym into the academic realm to be considered worthwhile, is a form of rhetorical multimodal composition of objective stimuli created to elicit a subjective emotional state in the participant. Now, we are referring to objective stimuli. The objective stimuli component of this definition is what we call immersion. And the subjective emotional state, which you as a maker do not have control over, that's in the hands of your audience or participant, that's what we call presence. You can read the literature, and authors in the exact same paper conflate these two terms. And Peter and I have stuck a stake in the ground, and we need to differentiate between these two terms, and that is consistent with the research by Mel Slater and his colleagues at University of Barcelona. So this ultimate medium is also the ultimate interdisciplinary collaboration between immersive technologies, the media arts, neuroscience, cognitive science, and of course, to be buzzword compliant, artificial intelligence. But we believe the real AI that's important is not AI, but IA, intelligence augmentation. And these disciplines come together to form what we call XRXD. Now, since this is an audience of designers, I'm just going to give you a little flavor of what we talk about in the book. We spend time talking about the 5 design affordances of immersive media, inspired by Janet Murray's work in Hamlet on the Holodeck, where she identifies the 4 affordances of digital media. You have the ability to completely create the participant's world with environmental control. You have the ability to work in full sensory mode. You can add olfaction, tactile sense. Any sensory modality is now fair game. You can use bio and neurofeedback mechanisms as part of the interaction between you and the participant. This is something that has been used very effectively in a VR project called Brave Mind, which is for doing PTSD therapy with veterans, and they use the olfactory sense, the tactile sense, in addition to audio and video to perform their the virtual reality therapy. And social physics. You can design for collective intelligence and bring people together in social structures, and purposeful emergence, that you can design for an entire ecology of creating socio-technical systems. So you're not just creating a newspaper article, you're not just creating a blog post, you're not even doing transmedia, you are part of a social technical system, and you have to understand your role in that system. Now, how do you design for these 5 modalities? Our book provides the answer. So Peter and I, we interviewed about 12 leading practitioners, including VR designers working on the NASA mission to the moon training, and various people running prototyping companies. And we interviewed about 12 scholars, 12 practitioners. And of course, we did a deep dive in the literature, and we have documented a logic model and design methods explicitly adapted for designing immersive experiences. And I invite you to get in touch with me and let's talk about how we can play a role in inventing this new medium.
Thank you so much.
7 minutes.
Yes, no, you killed it. Our next speaker is, I'm gonna let them help you because I just make things more
I
complicated.
always come in under.
Yeah. But you can have some of that.
I just went the evidence. This is actually a 45-minute resolution. Of course it is. All the details, because I go into case studies on each of those.
So.
Hello everyone. I am Filiz. I'm a second-year PhD student in interdisciplinary design and media, and a researcher at Media for Empowerment and Impact Lab. Well, before I start, I just want to say thank you for being here, and also thank you for the faculty. I'm so honored to be presenting with all of you. Today, I'm going to talk about designing a game to facilitate meaningful group discussions. But before I present my version of your coffees here, it's okay, don't worry about it. Before I switch to my version of the game, I want to give you a brief introduction of the original game, which is Choices. Choices is a board game about sexual assault, bystander intervention, and it is designed with and for high school kids. But when we playtested this game with the college students here at Northeastern, we realized that this game is not applied for them because the scenarios we had was for designed the high school students and their lifestyle, like their relationship with their families and their friends. So we had 3 goals and 3 problems in mind. Our goal was to provide a safe environment for students to talk about a very sensitive topic, which we generally don't have a chance to talk about these topics in a normal day. And secondly, we want to practice responses to possible bystander intervention scenarios. And we wanted to foster collective learning because currently the obligatory sexual assault training that we have at Northeastern is online. But as an alternative approach, we wanted to present a board game where they can collectively learn in a physical environment. We also wanted to have a portable version of the game because considering how we need a bigger table to assemble the game, and we need to go through the rules, but in orientations we generally don't have that much of a time, so we focused on having the minimal rules and mechanics. So why serious games? Games are a tool for change, and serious games are designed for specific audiences to train them about a specific topic. Basically, they are designed for mere entertainment, but this doesn't mean that they cannot be fun. For all these years, serious games are being used for different fields, including education, military, government, healthcare, and fitness and well-being. Well, my research design process, we first, as I mentioned in the beginning, we identified the problem, and then we started to prototype the game in different mediums. We were trying to find which medium would be the best to practice or train the undergraduate students. And we had a lot of discussions with the faculty, with other professors from other departments, and we tested again and basically co-designed the game with the undergraduate students here at Northeastern. We wanted to learn more about their struggles or the bystander scenarios that they are coming across living in the dorms, or having inappropriate relationship with a TA or professor. So we just like dive deep into this topic more and more. And we had a lot of iteration and refinement process, and hoping to have these meaningful conversations together in a physical environment. This is the final and current version of our game. The scenarios, these are like all the petals of the lotus petals are represented with different categories, which I will be talking really soon, and they have scenarios. So the person who are going to like take one card and read the scenario on it, like this one, and then read the answers out loud. But this does not mean that students need to choose an option, the ones that we are giving. You can think about this as a like an icebreaker, so that like they can hear more about the possible things that they might do, or they can just say that the something else, and they can come up with their own solution for the possible scenarios. And these scenarios are actually co-designed with the college undergraduate students here at Northeastern, and we ended up with like having 4 categories compared to having 6 categories for the high school kids. We have around town, friends, student life, and on campus. During summer and last year, we had a lot of playtesting sessions. We were so lucky to have their feedback and insight from the faculty members, graduate students, and other undergrads and co-op students. I also had a chance to present this in NCA last year in Denver, and we were talking about how this could be used in other universities if they want to train their students about this specific topic. So what's next for me? Currently, I am designing a core game for the choices where these kind of like topics will be expansion packs. So for example, if I want to talk about or like train the students about mental health, like climate change, immigration, or sexual assault, we can have like one main game and we can expansion packs. The second and one of the most important goal for me is to distribute this game as a free and accessible tool, so that other educators in other universities could like benefit from this and teach in their own university and learning environments. The second part of my second goal is to propose a physical and interactive orientation model for Northeastern that complements the current online sexual assault training that we have right now. The final goal for now is to showcase this game in more conferences, including Boston Festival of Indie Games, which is one of my favorite, and Games for Social Change. Yesterday, I was also able to present this game here in this room, actually, for ChemD exhibition day. And I had a lot of like very useful feedback from faculty and my peers. So my next goal is to, have more prototypes and reiterate the design. And if you ever would like to talk about the game or, play the game, which is with me right now, we can also contact me from these QR codes. Thank you. Thank you so much for listening.
Our final presenter is Lynn Jones.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ling. I'm the graduate student of Media Innovation and Data Communication, and I'm so happy and honored to be here. Today, I want to introduce a public relation case I did from 2021 to 23. And this case was important and interesting to me because it's about how a new business model sits in the intersection of the broader social and policy context, and how communication strategy could help navigate this complexity. And so at that time, I worked at Asia's largest food delivery driver platform company. How could I? Oh, yes. And I call it largest because it hired over 6 million food delivery drivers across the country. And at that time, the problem we faced, my team and I faced, was even food delivery job has been recognized by the government as a new occupation, but in reality, normally people will saw this job as a dangerous, lower class or lower status. And they will normally think if someone delivers food is because they could not find a better job. So this perception also hurt the image of the company and both this group of working people. So we need a totally new communication strategy to turn around that stereotype. This is the background. So at that time, I designed a nationwide questionnaire about these over 6 million food delivery drivers to know more about their motivation to do this job. And interestingly, we found a small but growing group of young generation, Gen Z. They did this job part-time, not because for income, but because of emotional fulfillment. So what does that mean? We found, for example, this young lady was a typical example of a young Chinese generation who did the food delivery job after she finished the day job. And according to her, she found that she could get the instant feedback from the customers and the schedule and the very flexible schedule through this work. And these things is something that she could not get from the main office job. And she is a typical example of Chinese young people who suffer from the work toxicity, hierarchy, and exploitation from the task job. So we started thinking that maybe we could use this new framing. That means that we frame food delivery job as an emotional side hustle, part-time job for younger people. And this job could give them flexibility, instant feedback, and emotional satisfaction. So we decided through this findings and insights from their questionnaire, we decided to initiate a multi-layer media strategy. So for example, we target the professionals, journalists, and the public by using the public-oriented media. And to this audience, we convey the sub-message about food delivery job is a self-rescue for younger generation. And then we also target the policymakers by use the government-based media. We reframe the food delivery job as a part of flexible employment policy, which is the official language of the government at that time. And the last is we also target the scholars, academia, because we want to get the support or endorsement from the academia. So by doing so, we could legitimize the transitional employment, which is also a key point of this type of job. So we decided to start a year-long media campaign, but we are still not sure when is the right time to do that until July. There was a viral topic in China online. It's about mental exhaustion among younger people, and this topic have lasted over 2 weeks, which is very rare. And we saw that maybe we could piggyback on that news event. So in the next month, we published this feature story about younger generation food delivery drivers. And we also invited the influencers on the TikTok to talk about this topic. And through after that, through the website analytics, we found that the public resonate with this angle, because they was talk about how their parents don't understand why they were burned out, and doing some physical work like food delivery job could help them to get the appreciation from the customers or get the emotional fulfillment. So the two key message we conveyed through that campaign has doubled and also increased 20 times. And I also saw some follow-up coverage, like some strong business media follow up to report this story using our framing. So this 3 months is more like an experiment for us, and it shows that this strategy work. So we decided to enter in the second phase of our campaign, which is we coordinate with labor economics to write a report about how flexible employment help these food delivery drivers to improve their life and help to the economic recovery in local community. And the turning point is December, when the government stopped the zero COVID policy. That means the focus of the government have shifted from the lockdown policy to the economic recovery across the whole country. So in the next months, we saw that there was tons of follow-up citation about this report. And we knew that there have been some, we have got some support from the academia by doing this second phase of campaign. So we entered the third phase immediately. We invited some government journalists to have some experience to do some food delivery job just in one day. And we also initiate a roundtable discussion for them with the food delivery drivers. And this hands-on experience finally produced as the opinion pieces in some very important government-based media. So this is also another important milestone for us. And yeah, this is the story of our media campaign. And I'm happy to answer any question if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let me get it on that microphone. Let's stop share. Thank you so much to all our speakers, and thank you for staying under 10 minutes. Really appreciated. So now I'm going to ask you to come to the front to where we have 2 handheld microphones, and so you can answer questions from the audience. I have my questions, but I want to make sure I give time to folks that aren't me. So if is there any question, you can direct it to one member or all. Any questions? Jimena?
I have many. I have to go back to each one of them. Yes. For the first one, Dan, when you're talking about journalism, there is a moment at the beginning where you say that journalism is a way to give voice to the voiceless, right? And I wonder if part of the work and the studies in the School of Journalism, how do you pass that mic? How do you share that stage? How do we make sure that the voiceless don't remain voiceless, and that we always have to be the ones who tell their stories, but that they can also get to tell their own stories? How do we democratize in some way that platform?
That's a really great question.
Try to press the button on there.
That's a really great question.
You should just press it once.
That's still a really great question. And it's something actually that I would have talked about a little bit more if we had more time. One of the things that we talk about, part of our training, is about reporting on trauma and reporting on difference, reporting on different communities. And we talk a lot about what's known as extractive journalism, which is the idea that journalists sort of helicopter into a crisis and report on that crisis. And, you know, more specifically, you start seeing communities as being defined by their worst day. their worst moment. So we talk a lot about that. And some of that training involves looking at ourselves, what our own experiences and biases might be, how those might impact the way that we approach stories, and then doing some deep research about ways that you can tell people's stories in a non-extractive way, including letting them tell their own story, letting their voice be heard, showing respect for the communities, and asking some hard questions of ourselves about what is this doing for us? What is this doing for our readers or users? And what is this doing for these communities? Being very upfront with the people we talk with from the start about all those things. I don't know if that answers your question, but.
Thank you so much. Great answer. I have more.
Yeah, I have more as well. And panelists, you're also welcome to ask me other questions. Oh, Paul.
Oh, no, you can go.
No.
Thank you for all the presentations, and it's a question for all of you. First is, does any of you have a design background? I mean, training. You do. Okay. You too. Okay. 3. Okay. So maybe the question doesn't really make sense. But now, what is the design component in each of your work? Or especially if you don't have a design background, what do you find interesting in design when you work together? So maybe it makes different meaning for all of you, but because of.
Well, the way I think of design is what you do when you have a problem and you don't have an obvious solution. The business people don't have a business solution. The engineers don't have a technical solution. The creatives don't have a creative solution. So what do, right? Design process, design thinking is about figuring out how to solve a complex, wicked problem that doesn't have obvious answers. And that's one of the reasons why Peter and I approached our book by applying the syntax or the skeleton of design process to give you the syntax to solve these wicked problems that really require creatives and engineers and designers to come together to provide the flesh and guts that give meaning to what it is you're creating. And it can't be a technology for a solution the way Zuckerberg and the billionaires think it should be.
Thank you.
So that's a really good question and something I thought about a lot while I was putting together my presentation. So I'm a process nerd. I'm fairly classically trained as a writer, and so I think a lot about the writing process. But in my work in newsrooms and the history of newsrooms, I find myself thinking about how the process of news work has been designed and redesigned over time. And just from my own experiences, when I was coaching local newsrooms to kind of decenter themselves from the printing press and think more about digital forms and digital ways of delivering stories and digital audiences, I didn't know it at the time, but I was engaging in design thinking. And when I got here, and I taught journalism in an English department, and then I got here and started hanging out with the design faculty and realized that I had been engaging in design thinking without having the words for it. And that has definitely influenced the way that I am looking at this work backwards and forwards. And the other thing that I am aware of is who has not been involved in constructing those processes historically. Journalism has historically been controlled by white, middle class, upper class men in urban environments. And the boundaries of journalism and what it means to do legitimate journalistic work has been defined and designed by those constituencies. That's changing, but it's also why I think projects like the Oral History Project, if we're going to do those, we need to be really intentional to make sure that we are getting a cross-section of the human experience. So we are understanding the totality of the experience as much as any one project or one person can.
I'll give a very quick practical answer. I actually was not trained as a designer, but I've always done it. And I've always worked places where I was the only designer. in a room full of reporters or business people or printers. I worked a lot, when design and journalism was a blue collar trade. And that idea of being at the intersection of all these different disciplines is what I love about design, and also the secret power of design. That you have to know how to talk to reporters and writers, you have to know how to talk to developers, you have to know how to talk to printers who are actually putting your thing on the printing press, whatever that is. I think that's sort of the power of design, and what sort of moved me about the work I've done is that feeling that I'm at the center of all these different agendas and different trainings.
I also really like the question, and I want to just add one tiny point. Having the visual background and game design background, I actually really like the intersection of it, because even if I'm not like designing the game but writing a paper, like I am able to see from a designer perspective and a user or a player perspective, which is helping me, because sometimes even if we want to deliver a message from our perspective, we might be able to, think that we are doing that. But from a player's perspective, maybe, or a reader's perspective, it might not be the case. So seeing these like two perspectives, like helping me a lot, I think. Yeah. Do you have it?
I didn't have any design background actually, but for me, like this campaign, the reason I started this campaign, I started this kind of designing process was not that I want to design something, but I have a problem I want to solve, and what approach I could use to solve that. So I use XYZ to do that. So for me, in communication industry, in this case, for me, the design process is more like I have something I want to solve, and then I use anything, any way I'm comfortable with using to solve it. So yeah, this is my a little bit feedback.
Very interesting. Thank you. Oh, and I wanted to add one more thing, because design, of course, is shifting rapidly in the 21st century, and we could do an entire panel discussion on the importance and meaning of co-design and co-creation. And I want to do a little plug here for an amazing book called Collective Intelligence that came out of the work of William Riccio and Katerina Zedek.
I wanted to follow up on that specifically. David talked about co-design, and both Filiz and Lynn talked about getting input from the user, right? And people like the play testing and the interviews and the surveys with food delivery workers and things like that. So can you talk a little bit about how that input from others outside of the design team, right? But how getting that input outside was important to your work? So Filiz and Lynn.
If I understand right, so your question is about the external feedback, including the public, the professionals.
The public and the food delivery workers, how you use their input to develop messages.
Yes. For example, the example I showed up that after finish this campaign, we also became friends. The reason for that is because when doing this campaign, when she became the one of the example of this campaign, she found that her voice was heard. She has been seen, which they have long time ignored by maybe the mainstream system for a long time. So I think this type of feedback helped me to more understand the approach to combine the public perception and the commercial goal, and also the academia feedback. And so I would say that this kind of feedback could help us to better understand the nuance of this campaign, and how could we balance the voice of the individuals and the goal of the whole campaign.
For me, that's also a part of my PhD actually, but I want to normalize talking about some these like sensitive topics in our everyday life. And to do that, I think it's important to know which kind of language we are also using in these mediums that we choose to design. And we had a chance to test this game with not only undergrads, but with like faculty from other universities, and also with my friends, just to see how people are like perceiving this topic and how would they like to kind of be presented actually as a bystander. So the language and the co-design process of it was actually a very big part of our design progress.
I will try then to synthesize my questions so that they're integrated. And I think they're similar in some way, but you, David, talk about eliciting subjective emotional states in participants. Filiz talks about making conversations meaningful. And then Lynn talks about, in some ways, this emotional side hustling, right? Like making it in some ways like that their feelings that they have about that they become on mainstream. But I come here like as a devil's advocate in some ways, like in the three examples, when and what's the boundary where it can be exploitative. Like, so for example, with David, right? Like we want to have emotional responses in participants with what purpose, right? Because it can be used to manipulate participants to make them pay for something, right? Like emotions are such a thing. But then also having meaningful conversations can be used against the people and like how you feel about things. And then in terms of the reframing of the food delivery drivers, if they're more satisfied, is it sustaining exploitation of having double gigs, of not being able to follow, right? Like you're happy and you're following two sides, but you're responding to a symptom of the cost of living. And so it just puts like a happy stamp on like a very big capitalistic problem. So how do we manage that difference or balance in the three cases?
Well, that's a really big, complicated answer to that. To try to put it as succinctly as possible is one of the things that Peter and I talk about in the book, is that this is not only the most expressive, not only is XR the most expressive medium we've ever created, but it is also the most dangerous medium we've ever created, because in the hands of the wrong people, you can really use this to completely change people's perspective. All you have to do to understand what the ethical dilemma is to either read or watch A Clockwork Orange.
Thank you. For me, actually, we wanted for players to, you know, exploit their like answers, because we want to actually hear their real struggles, or what they would do if they would come across with a situation in the campus. Like we don't want to hear just there is no like one specific correct answer, but we actually don't want to hear about it. The purpose here is to foster them to have these conversations so that they can also learn from each other. For example, if let's say that as a bystander, I had a situation, let's say in library, while playing the game, if I share this answer, another person, let's say, could learn from me. And my main goal here is that like being to be clueless in a second, let's say that like if I'm having that situation here, I just want them to be a bit prepared for the possible solutions or possible facilities that they can call, rather than being clueless at that second, so that like they are prepared for the situation. So I want them to actually, you know, give me like kind of an uncommon or different answer, so that we can actually also change or edit the answers of our scenarios based on that too.
And actually, as I mentioned, we did a nationwide survey before we started this campaign. And actually, when we got the answer from the surveys, we were pretty surprised because this type, like emotional fulfillment, is totally new perspective. Even the very experienced professionals or PR never heard that voice before. So we were pretty cautious with that answers. And at the time we did a follow-up validation. That means we did some qualitative interviews with them one by one to know more about the true background behind that. That's why but still it's still a very new perspective. So in the first phase of our campaign, we just start a very small scale because we want to test whether this narrative could be accepted by the audience and whether how large scale of this narrative. So that's how we process this. But it's true that we should be very cautious with any new answers that might be put them in the danger of exploitation.
Something just from a journalism perspective, because it's something I think we wrestle with a lot, and that is that I think there is a shorthand version that impact means simplicity, having a simple understanding of something. And I think we always want to move towards the opposite of that. That impact is about complexity, about making somebody not just feel something, but maybe perhaps think more deeply, to think that it's not black and white, but there's a lot of gradations and a lot of nuance.
Oh, and I wanted to add that Peter and I define this whole process in this medium as a rhetorical medium. And I know that the word rhetoric has gotten a bad rap in popular culture because people say, that's rhetoric or whatever. But we're using rhetoric in the old sense of the word, that we are creating a persuasive artifact, and we are assuming that the participants or the audience is well informed. And yes, we're being persuasive, we're trying to get a message across, but we're doing it ethically. And that's where things can get complicated. Meg, did you want to add something?
Oh, sure. I'll weigh in. So one of the things I appreciate about the oral history process, so for those of you who are not familiar with it, one of the things that happens during that process is when the researcher is done cleaning up the transcript, the oral history subject gets that transcript to review. So it is very much a co-creation of an historical artifact. And I love that about oral history. And the other interesting thing about oral history, just in case you're curious, it is not considered human subjects research. It's governed by its own body and its own ethics and best practices. So the vibe is really different. And I appreciate it a lot. And I was particularly mindful in this project about the importance of that co-creation, because I was asking people to remember what camera they had used in like July of 1969. Because I was showing, I showed Don Preston photos and he kind of looked at me and he was like, I think I remember. And then during the editing process, they added and corrected themselves. And it was just really cool. And Dan, you'll be getting your rough transcript soon. Thank you.
So we just have a couple of minutes. Does anybody, I can have one last question, or if anybody on the panel wants to ask someone else on the panel something, no? If not, I wanted to ask Dan and Meg about what kind of visual training journalists get or should get. You talked about, photos, about designing multimedia presentation of news and things like that. What design or visual training do you think is needed for journalists now? Dan mentioned journalists need to do everything. It seems like this is one more thing.
More than they're getting right now, and they will need increasingly more going forward. And I think yesterday's CAMD Day keynote by Michael Slackman from the New York Times really reinforced that for me. Video is becoming an increasingly large part of their work product. Podcast studios at the New York Times are being converted into video spaces. The app has much more video. And so I think being able to do that well is going to be more important. Journalism is becoming more of a visual medium. What hasn't changed is the importance of teaching just really good shoe leather reporting, like embodied reporting out in the community, verification. Are we representing different constituencies accurately and authentically? And I do think writing is still really important, but writing is a tool for thinking as much as it is a tool for presenting these days.
I agree. I'm always a little suspicious of answers that are like, you need to do more work for the same salary, because that's often sort of the answer. I think that it's maybe not that journalists need to know how to do everything, but they need to be conversant with it. So they don't necessarily have to be coders, but they have to understand what are the challenges of a developer, what is possible and what is difficult. The same thing with photo and with video. And some of that just starts with looking inside of yourself. I mean, it's a very visual world, thinking about like what moves me, what excites me, and understanding why, which I think a lot of journalists might not do. They might say, oh, that looks really cool, but understanding how does this work? How's this put together? Why does this move me? So some of that education, I think, can help a designer be more, a journalist be more fully featured without necessarily doing more work for the same money.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I would advise anybody who's going into this field is to encourage them, A, write, B, visual language, and C, understand that you're going to be part of a constellation and you're going to be part of democracy. Not democracy as in the political thing, but democracy in how we create a model of our shared world. That we are playing a role in the reality construction machinery. We're part of that constellation, and you really need to understand how that machinery works because you're playing a role in it. And I've been very inspired by John Whitby's book, The Social Fact, where he argues that journalists need to understand that they're no longer reporters. They're no longer storytellers. They're no longer whatever they used to do, that they are now part of the knowledge generation machinery.
Thank you so much to all our speakers. Please join me in thanking them for their presentations. And I mean, to me, this is maybe the start of my own thinking about how to think of communication design as a big important piece of what we do. And I really appreciate all your contributions. Thank you for coming. Please take food because we have lots, and happy Design Research Week.